The small diner at the corner of the street was nothing fancy. Its paint was a little chipped, and the neon sign outside flickered on and off in the evenings. The air inside smelled of fried eggs, coffee, and the faint hint of cleaning soap. Despite all of this, it was warm, welcoming, and it had a heart. The heart of that place was a young woman who worked as a waitress. She had been working there for several years, not because she loved the job, but because she had no other choice. Life had not been kind to her, but she had learned to keep going one day at a time. Every morning she arrived before the sun had fully risen, tying her apron tight around her waist. She moved with quiet efficiency, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and cleaning tables, all while keeping a polite smile for the customers. She didn't complain, even when the tips were small or when people left without saying thank you. She had long ago learned that bitterness did nothing to change her reality. What mattered to her was that she tried her best every single day. It was during one of these early mornings that she first noticed the child. The little girl wasn't much older than 7 or 8. She always sat in the same corner, her small hands clutching a backpack that looked far too heavy for her tiny frame. She had dark circles under her eyes as if she hadn't slept well, and she rarely spoke unless spoken to. At first, the waitress thought she was just another child passing through. But she soon realized that the little girl came every day, almost like clockwork. The child's presence tugged at the waitress's heart. She had no idea why, but seeing her alone stirred a kind of protectiveness she had never felt before. It wasn't pity. She didn't feel sorry for the girl. She felt a need to care to make the child feel safe, even if it was just for a few hours over a plate of pancakes or a cup of hot chocolate. One morning, after watching the child quietly pick at her food, the waitress decided to approach her. "Good morning," she said softly, kneeling down to the little girl's level. The child looked up with wide, cautious eyes. There was a flicker of surprise when she realized someone was actually speaking to her kindly. "Would you like a chocolate muffin today?" the waitress asked, her tone gentle. The little girl nodded slowly, her lips curling into a tiny smile that seemed almost fragile, like it could break at any moment. The waitress brought the muffin over and sat down at the corner of the table. "I noticed you come here almost every day," she said. "Do you like it here?" The girl hesitated. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. I like it," she admitted. "It's quiet and people are nice here." The waitress smiled, offering a comforting nod. "Well, I'm glad you feel that way. You're always welcome here, okay? No matter what." From that morning on, a subtle routine began to form. The waitress would make sure the child's favorite snack was ready when she arrived. She would pour her hot chocolate with a little extra care, making sure the foam formed a small heart on top. She began noticing little details, the way the girl tucked her hair behind her ears, how she chewed her food slowly, how she sometimes hugged her backpack tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping her company. Each observation made the waitress's heart grow fonder, and each act of kindness felt natural, almost instinctive. It wasn't long before the waitress discovered that the child had no one to wait for her after school. Her mother was never mentioned, and the child spoke rarely of her father. When the waitress gently asked, the girl would only shake her head or say, "He's busy." The waitress didn't push further. She knew that some pains were too heavy to voice aloud, especially for a child who seemed so small in the vast world around her. Despite her own exhaustion, the waitress began to look forward to the moments she could spend with the child. She would stay a little longer after her shift, helping the girl with her homework, listening to her stories, or simply keeping her company. Sometimes they would draw pictures together on napkins, laughing quietly when their attempts at art turned into funny scribbles. Other times they would sit in silence, sharing warmth without needing words. Life outside the diner was difficult for the waitress. Her apartment was tiny and old, with creaking floors and a leaky faucet that never seemed to get fixed. Bills piled up faster than she could pay them, and there were nights when she went to bed hungry. But inside the diner with the child, she felt a small measure of peace. It was a fragile happiness, but it was real, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was making a difference, no matter how small. Other people noticed the bond forming between them. A few regular customers would smile knowingly when they saw the little girl sitting with the waitress. The coworkers would sometimes tease gently, asking if she was the child's second mother, and she would just laugh, a little embarrassed but secretly proud. She never spoke of her own struggles or how lonely she sometimes felt. She simply poured her attention and care into someone else who needed it more. The child, in turn, began to trust her more with each passing day. She would tell the waitress small secrets, like how she had seen a stray cat near the corner shop or how she loved the sound of the rain on the roof. She began to open up about her feelings, about her sadness when she felt invisible to the world. And every time she spoke, the waitress would listen, offering gentle words and quiet encouragement. The child's laughter when it came was like sunlight piercing through gray clouds. It wasn't just kindness that the waitress gave. It was consistency. The child knew she could rely on her day after day, and that consistency mattered more than anything else. It built trust, something that had been missing from the little girl's life. She learned that someone could care for her without expecting anything in return, and that simple truth became a lifeline she clung to. Sometimes, when the diner was quiet, the waitress would catch herself staring at the child, wondering how someone so young could carry so much sadness. She thought about her own life, about the people she had lost, about the chances she hadn't had. And yet she didn't dwell on her own hardships for long. Her attention always returned to the child, whose world was smaller and more vulnerable, and whose heart needed protection more than anything else. The first part of their story was about small, unnoticed gestures. A cup of cocoa, a warm smile, a listening ear. Things that might seem insignificant to the outside world, but to the child, they were monumental. She began to feel seen, heard, and valued in ways she had never experienced before. And for the waitress, each day spent helping, listening, and caring gave her life a sense of purpose that no amount of money or comfort could provide. In that humble diner, between the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, a quiet miracle was taking place. It was not grand or dramatic. There were no applause or awards, but it was real. The waitress, who had little, was giving everything she could to someone even smaller and more fragile. And in doing so, she was creating a bond that neither time nor circumstance could easily break. Even on the hardest days, when exhaustion weighed down her shoulders and the world outside felt unforgiving, the waitress would see the little girl and remember why she kept going. Her heart would lift slightly, buoyed by the child's shy smile, by the way she tucked her little hands into her lap when she felt nervous, by the way she whispered a timid thank you when offered a snack. These moments were small, but they were enough. They were everything. And so the first chapter of their shared story was written quietly, day by day, in the humble corners of a small diner. A story of empathy, of small acts of courage and love, and of two lives intersecting in ways neither could have expected. One was struggling to survive, the other struggling to be noticed. Together, they found a connection that transcended hardship, a connection that would grow and deepen in ways neither could yet imagine. The waitress could not have known it then, but the simple kindness she showed would one day change both their lives in ways she could never have dreamed. And for now, that was enough. That, and the quiet knowledge that even in a world that often felt harsh and uncaring, one person could make a difference in another person's life simply by showing up, simply by caring, simply by being there. After the first few weeks of noticing the little girl, the waitress and the child grew closer in ways that were quiet but deeply meaningful. The child began to come to the diner at the same time every day like clockwork, and the waitress was always there to greet her with a warm smile and a gentle question. "How was your day today?" The question was simple, but it carried a weight the child had rarely felt before, a weight of genuine care. The child would sometimes shrug, mumbling small responses, but the waitress never pushed her. She had learned that patience was more important than words. Some days the child would sit quietly, lost in thought, sipping her hot chocolate as if it were the only comfort in the world. Other days she would offer tiny smiles or even laugh softly at something the waitress said. Each small gesture became a treasure, a sign that trust was slowly growing between them. One rainy afternoon the child arrived looking particularly sad. Her hair was damp and her eyes were heavy with tears that hadn't yet fallen. The waitress immediately noticed. She walked over and placed a hand gently on the child's shoulder. "Did something happen today?" she asked softly. The child shook her head but didn't speak. The waitress didn't press. Instead, she grabbed a napkin and handed it to her. "Sometimes it helps to write it down," she suggested. The child hesitated, then took the napkin and began scribbling with her small pencil. When she was done, she handed it to the waitress. It was a little note, messy and uneven, that simply said, "I feel lonely. The waitress smiled kindly and knelt to be at eye level. "You are not alone," she said firmly but gently. "I'm here, and I will be here whenever you need me." From that day, their bond deepened. The child began to trust the waitress more openly. She started talking about her feelings, about her day at school, about moments when she felt invisible to the people around her. Sometimes she would confide in the waitress about her fears, how she worried that her father didn't notice her, or how she felt like she didn't belong anywhere. The waitress listened, never judging, never interrupting, simply offering quiet understanding. At times, the child would ask questions about the waitress's life too. She wanted to know why she worked so hard, why she never seemed upset even when things were tough. The waitress would smile and explain that everyone had challenges, but it was important to focus on the little joys and on helping others. "Life is easier when you make a difference, even if it's small," she told the child. The little girl seemed to understand, though she didn't always respond with words. Sometimes she would nod, her eyes wide and thoughtful, as if trying to absorb the meaning of what was being said. The waitress also began to notice the child's routines outside the diner. The girl often mentioned being alone at home after school, waiting for a parent who was always busy. She would talk about the quiet house, the empty rooms, and how she wished someone would notice her, even just a little. The waitress felt a mix of sadness and determination. She couldn't change the child's entire life, but she could be there during these crucial moments, providing the care and attention that the girl desperately needed. As weeks passed, the waitress started small traditions to make the child feel more connected. On Fridays, she would draw little smiley faces on the top of the girl's hot chocolate foam. On Mondays, she would leave a small snack on her favorite corner table before the girl arrived. Sometimes they would sit together after the diner had closed for the night, coloring pictures, telling stories, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. These moments became the child's anchor, a small world where she felt seen, heard, and valued. The child's confidence began to grow slowly. She would smile more often, laugh more freely, and even start talking to other people in the diner. Though she always returned to the waitress's side, she began to ask questions about the world, about life, and about how to handle difficult situations. The waitress would answer patiently, giving advice that was simple yet meaningful. She explained that it was okay to feel sad sometimes, that asking for help was not weakness, and that kindness often came back in ways one could never predict. One day, the child mentioned her father in passing. "He's always busy," she said softly, staring into her cup of chocolate. The waitress nodded, understanding that sometimes adults were caught in their own lives and responsibilities. She didn't pry, but she offered a gentle comment. "Sometimes people are busy, but it doesn't mean they don't care. And even if someone is busy, it doesn't mean you can't find people who will notice and help you." The child nodded slowly, her small hands curling around the cup, absorbing the words more than she could express. The waitress also realized that this relationship was teaching her things she hadn't expected. She saw the resilience in the child, the way she navigated her loneliness, and the way she still managed to find small joys even when life felt heavy. The child's courage inspired her to keep going, to work harder, and to hold on to hope even when her own world seemed uncertain. They were helping each other in ways neither could fully articulate, and that gave both of them a quiet sense of strength. Even outside the diner, the waitress thought about the child often. She worried about her, especially on days when the girl seemed sad or withdrawn. She would imagine ways to make her life a little brighter, a little safer, a little happier. She bought small gifts when she could, a book here, a warm scarf there, never expecting gratitude, only wanting the child to feel cared for. The act of giving itself became a source of joy for the waitress, something that filled her heart in a way her busy and often difficult life rarely allowed. As the seasons changed, the waitress noticed how the child's personality blossomed. She became more expressive, more playful, and more willing to share her thoughts. The little laughs that had been rare now came more often, lightening the atmosphere in the diner. The regular customers noticed it too. They would smile when they saw the child giggling with the waitress or coloring pictures on napkins. Some would whisper compliments about the waitress, remarking on her patience and kindness. Though she never sought recognition, it warmed her heart to see that her efforts, however quiet, were visible to those around her. One evening, after a particularly long and tiring day, the waitress noticed that the child seemed unusually quiet. She approached and asked softly if she wanted to talk. The child hesitated but then whispered, "I'm scared sometimes that no one will ever care about me." The waitress took her hand gently, holding it for a moment. "I care," she said firmly, "and I will always care. You are never alone when I'm around. No matter what." The child looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and managed a small, grateful smile. That simple exchange became another memory they would both carry forward, a memory of trust, care, and the beginnings of a bond that neither of them fully understood yet. The waitress's actions weren't dramatic. She didn't save the world or perform heroic feats, but to the child, these simple gestures, listening, comforting, offering a treat, sharing a quiet moment, meant everything. They were proof that someone could care deeply without expecting anything in return. And for the waitress, the small changes she saw in the child's demeanor, the gradual blossoming of confidence and trust, were proof that her efforts mattered. By the end of part 2, the relationship between the waitress and the child had evolved into something profound. It was no longer just about snacks and homework help. It was about emotional safety, about building trust in a world that often overlooked the vulnerable. It was about a connection that crossed the boundaries of age and circumstance, a connection that would continue to grow and strengthen in ways that neither the waitress nor the child could yet imagine. The diner remained the backdrop for this quiet, ongoing story. The smells of cooking, the clatter of dishes, and the soft hum of conversation formed the setting. But the heart of the place was now not just the waitress or the child. It was the space between them, filled with understanding, empathy, and a shared sense of being seen and valued. Each day they spent together reinforced the notion that even in a world that often seemed harsh and uncaring, small acts of kindness could create ripples of hope and connection. And so, the second chapter of their story was written quietly, through everyday moments. A cup of chocolate, a gentle word, a listening ear, a shared laugh. These were the things that mattered. These were the things that shaped the child's world, giving her a glimpse of what love and care could feel like. And for the waitress, each small gesture was a reminder that even in her own challenging life, she had the power to change someone else's life for the better, simply by being present, simply by caring, simply by showing up. In the quiet of that small diner, a fragile but growing trust had formed. It was a trust built not on promises, not on wealth or grand gestures, but on the simple, undeniable truth that someone cared. And in the world outside, where the little girl often felt invisible and the waitress often felt unseen, this trust was the most valuable thing either of them had ever experienced. Over the next few months, the bond between the waitress and the little girl continued to grow stronger. The diner had become a place of safety and comfort for the child, a space where she could be herself without fear of judgment or being ignored. The waitress was always there, quietly attentive, offering small gestures of care and kindness. Yet amid the routine and familiarity, small hints began to appear that something in the child's life was different from what the waitress had assumed. It started subtly. One day, while clearing tables, the waitress noticed a sleek black car parked outside the diner. She had seen it before, but today she saw a driver open the door and carefully help the child inside, offering a polite nod to the waitress. The child waved, smiling as she climbed into the back seat. The waitress felt a small twinge of curiosity. She had never thought about the child's home life in detail. She assumed it was modest, like most of the people in the neighborhood. But the car seemed out of place. Other clues followed. The child occasionally mentioned things that didn't quite fit her humble appearance. She spoke of rooms larger than the diner itself, of a garden filled with flowers, and of toys she had never seen in any store nearby. She would talk about events and parties that seemed extravagant for a child so young, but she always said it casually, as if it were normal. The waitress listened with quiet interest, though she didn't pry. She had learned not to force children to share what they were not ready to say. Still, the details planted a seed of curiosity in her mind. One rainy afternoon, the child arrived at the diner soaking wet. The waitress immediately took her to the back and offered a warm towel and a cup of steaming hot chocolate. As she helped the girl dry off, the child spoke softly about her father. "He works a lot," she said, "and sometimes I don't see him for days." Her small voice was filled with sadness, but there was also a subtle pride, as if she admired him despite the distance. The waitress nodded, understanding the mix of admiration and longing. She didn't comment on the father's wealth, only offering comfort. "I'm glad you have someone you look up to," she said gently, "and I'll be here when you need someone too." The child's mentions of her father became more frequent, though she never revealed much. She spoke of a big office, important meetings, and people who wore suits and spoke in serious tones. The waitress listened carefully, sensing that this was a world completely different from her own, a world the child navigated quietly without boasting or complaining. Despite these glimpses into a life of wealth, the waitress never felt jealousy or judgment. To her, the child was still the same small, vulnerable girl she had grown to care for deeply. Meanwhile, the child's trust in the waitress continued to deepen. She began to share little worries and fears that she had never spoken aloud before. She confessed how lonely she felt when her father was away, and how she sometimes wished she could run to someone who understood her feelings. The waitress would always listen carefully, sometimes taking the child's small hands in hers and assure her that she was not alone. These moments were quiet but transformative. The child's emotional world, once isolated and fragile, began to open, filling slowly with hope and reassurance. The waitress also started noticing small contradictions in the child's life. Sometimes the child would mention trips or gifts that seemed far beyond what someone in a modest home could afford. Other times she would talk about people who seemed influential or important, yet always in a casual, almost matter-of-fact way. The waitress didn't jump to conclusions. She simply listened and offered support where she could. Still, curiosity grew in her heart. She began to wonder what life was like for the child outside of the diner, in the places she rarely spoke about. One afternoon, while the diner was quiet, the child drew a picture for the waitress. It was a colorful, messy drawing of a large house with tall windows, a garden, and a car parked outside. The waitress smiled at the effort, praising the child's creativity, but she couldn't help noticing the details that hinted at a life she had never imagined. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "It looks like a really big house. Do you like it there?" The child's eyes brightened, but she only shrugged. "It's okay," she said quietly. "It's big." There was a subtle sadness beneath her words, a longing for attention and connection that money and luxury could not provide. As the weeks went by, the waitress began to see a pattern. The child had comfort in material things but lacked emotional connection, something the waitress could offer in abundance. She realized that no matter how much wealth surrounded the child, her real need was for attention, care, and affection. This realization made the waitress more determined than ever to continue supporting the child. Not because of what the child had or didn't have, but simply because she was a child in need of someone who truly cared. During this time, the waitress also began to notice small signs of struggle in the child's emotional state. Sometimes she would appear withdrawn, staring at the floor or hugging her backpack tightly. Other times she would speak in a quiet voice, almost as if testing the waters before trusting anyone with her feelings. The waitress responded with patience and gentle encouragement. "It's okay to feel scared or sad," she would say. "You don't have to hide it here. I'm here with you." These words, though simple, became an anchor for the child, a constant reminder that someone cared without expecting anything in return. The child's growing trust also led to small acts of joy and playfulness. On some days, she would sneak a smile or giggle at a funny comment the waitress made. On others, she would draw pictures or create little games with the waitress during quiet moments in the diner. These small gestures were precious, signs of a slowly blossoming confidence and happiness. The waitress cherished each moment, recognizing that these simple experiences were filling a gap that no wealth or privilege could touch. Despite the hints of wealth in the child's privileged background, the waitress never allowed these details to change her perspective. She continued to treat the child as she always had, equally with love, patience, and understanding. She knew that wealth could never replace emotional support and human connection. The child, for her part, seemed to sense this unwavering care. She began to confide more openly, sharing her worries, fears, and dreams. She would ask small questions about life, about kindness, and about how to cope with loneliness. The waitress answered patiently, using her own experiences as gentle guidance, never judging or imposing. At times, the waitress would watch the child interact with other people, noticing the subtle ways she sought approval or attention. It was clear that the child had learned to navigate a world where adults were often busy or distracted. She was cautious, careful, and polite, but the waitress could see the longing beneath her composed exterior. It made her even more determined to provide the support the child needed, to offer the attention and warmth that were missing in the child's life. One evening, after a particularly long day, the child hesitated before leaving the diner. She seemed unsure of herself, glancing at the waitress with a mix of hope and hesitation. The waitress smiled gently. "You can stay a little longer if you want," she said. "Or we can just sit and talk for a few minutes." The child nodded, settling into her favorite corner with a small sigh of relief. They spent the next hour quietly, coloring pictures, sharing stories, and enjoying the comforting routine of their friendship. In that moment, the waitress realized just how much this simple connection had grown to mean to both of them. The waitress also began to reflect on her own life during these months. She thought about her struggles, her hardships, and the moments when she felt alone. And yet, she found a new sense of purpose in caring for the child. Helping someone else gave her life meaning, a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced before. She understood that true value wasn't measured in money or possessions, but in the difference one could make in another person's life. Hints about the child's wealth continued to appear, sometimes through casual mentions, other times through observations like the expensive car or the large house. Still, the waitress never allowed these signs to overshadow the real focus, the child's emotional needs. She understood that material wealth could never replace love, care, and attention, and so she remained devoted, offering her time, her energy, and her heart, fully aware that these small acts of kindness were making a profound impact on the child's life. By the end of Part 3, the story had taken on a new layer of complexity. The child's privileged background was becoming more evident, yet the emotional gap in her life was clear. The waitress's role was evolving from a simple helper to a vital source of emotional support and stability. Their bond, once quiet and subtle, was growing stronger, built on trust, care, and an understanding that went beyond words. In the quiet corners of the diner, a small but powerful connection was taking shape. The waitress, humble and hard-working, continued to give without expectation, while the child, wealthy yet emotionally deprived, began to experience the warmth of true care. And though neither of them fully realized it yet, these quiet months of friendship were laying the foundation for a life-changing revelation that would soon alter the course of both their lives. It was a quiet morning at the diner. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden light through the windows. The waitress was setting out coffee cups and wiping down tables when the little girl came in, her small backpack bouncing lightly as she walked. She smiled shyly at the waitress, who returned the smile warmly, placing a chocolate muffin on her favorite corner table. Everything seemed ordinary, just another day in their routine, but today would turn out to be very different. As the child sat down and began to eat, the door to the diner opened, and a tall man in a sharp suit walked in. He moved with an air of quiet authority, scanning the room with a calm but serious gaze. At first, the waitress didn't pay much attention, accustomed as she was to all sorts of customers coming and going. But as the man approached the child's table, a flicker of recognition crossed her mind. She had seen him before in passing in newspapers and on television, a man of influence, wealth, and importance. And in that instant, everything she thought she knew about the child seemed to change. The child looked up and brightened at the sight of him.
"Daddy!"
she said softly, a mixture of excitement and relief in her voice. She quickly hugged him, and he smiled warmly, ruffling her hair with gentle familiarity. It was a scene the waitress had never expected to witness. She felt her heart skip a beat, realizing that the man before her was not just any parent. He was someone incredibly powerful, someone whose life existed in a world completely separate from the diner, from her life, and from the struggles she had faced. The waitress felt a mixture of emotions, surprise, curiosity, and a faint anxiety she couldn't quite explain. She had spent months caring for this child without knowing anything about her home life, and now the reality of who her father was suddenly loomed over the small, quiet corner where she had grown so used to offering comfort and companionship. She worried, irrationally perhaps, that her acts of kindness might be seen as opportunistic, as if she had been trying to impress someone wealthy without realizing it. But the child didn't notice the waitress's inner turmoil. She was fully absorbed in the warmth and love of her father's attention, and for a moment, the diner seemed to shrink to just the three of them, the man, the child, and the woman who had quietly supported the girl for so many months. The father's eyes finally met the waitress's, and she felt a flicker of uncertainty. He approached her with a calm, confident smile. "You must be the one who has been taking care of my daughter," he said. His voice was steady, warm, and unexpectedly gentle. The waitress nodded, unsure of what to say. "Yes, I've just been helping her with small things," she replied softly, trying to keep her voice steady. The man's expression softened. "I can see that," he said. "She talks about you a lot. She says you listen, that you care, and that you make her feel safe. I've been so busy that I didn't realize she needed someone like you. And now I understand how lucky she has been to have you." The waitress felt a wave of relief mixed with surprise. She had expected questions about her intentions or skepticism, but instead she was met with gratitude. Gratitude that was genuine and heartfelt. For months she had given her time and care without expecting anything in return, and now, in this unexpected moment, she realized that her efforts had been noticed, appreciated, and valued in a way that went far beyond money or status. The child looked between the two adults, sensing a new connection forming. She had been lonely for so long, often feeling invisible to her father, and now she could see the man acknowledging not just her presence, but the woman who had filled the gap in her life with love and kindness. She smiled shyly, tucking her small hands into her lap as her eyes flicked between them. The father continued, his tone thoughtful. "I may have all the money in the world, but it doesn't buy what you've given her. Attention, care, patience. Those are things I've failed to provide. You've done something that no amount of wealth could replace." The waitress listened, touched and humbled. She had never imagined that her small acts could have such a profound impact. She felt a deep sense of quiet pride, not in recognition or reward, but in the knowledge that she had truly helped someone who needed it most. As the conversation continued, the waitress realized that the child's father had been searching for answers in his own way. He had been too busy with work, with meetings and responsibilities, to notice the emotional needs of his daughter. And now, standing there in the diner, he was seeing for the first time the role the waitress had played in shaping his child's happiness. It was a revelation for all of them, a moment when the past months of quiet, patient effort were suddenly illuminated by truth and acknowledgement. The waitress could hardly contain her emotions. She felt a mixture of relief, joy, and a touch of disbelief. She had acted out of pure care, never expecting anything in return, and yet here was the father recognizing her importance in his daughter's life. She realized that kindness, when genuine, always finds a way to touch hearts, even if it goes unnoticed for a long time. The child's father looked at the waitress again, his eyes softening. "I want to make sure you're taken care of," he said. "You've been a part of her life in a way that matters more than I can express. Please allow me to show my gratitude." The waitress shook her head gently, her humility preventing her from fully accepting the offer, but she could see that his intentions were sincere. She felt a warmth in her chest, knowing that the little girl she had cared for would now be supported in every way possible. The diner, which had been a quiet backdrop for so many months of small, unnoticed moments, now seemed alive with possibility. The waitress, the child, and her father stood together in a space that had once been ordinary, and it was suddenly extraordinary. It was a meeting of worlds, the humble and the wealthy, the quiet caregiver and the busy parent, brought together by love, need, and the invisible thread of connection that had been quietly weaving their lives together. The child's happiness was palpable. She smiled shyly at her father and then at the waitress, feeling a sense of security she had not known for months. She knew that the woman sitting across from her was not leaving her side anytime soon, and she felt the warmth of being seen, understood, and loved by two people who genuinely cared for her. It was a moment of emotional clarity, a turning point where loneliness began to fade, replaced by connection, trust, and affection. For the waitress, the encounter was a profound confirmation of the values she had always held close to her heart. She had believed, even in moments of hardship, that kindness mattered more than money or recognition. Now, standing in the presence of someone powerful, she realized that her quiet efforts had created a ripple effect that reached far beyond what she had imagined. The child's father acknowledged her role, but more importantly, he saw the genuine love and care she had offered without expectation. In the days that followed, the waitress noticed subtle changes in the child. She was brighter, more confident, and more willing to share her feelings. She began to speak more openly about her experiences and her hopes for the future. The reassurance that came from both the waitress and her father gave her a newfound sense of security. She had been supported by someone who truly cared, and now she had the backing of a parent who was willing to recognize and nurture her emotional needs. The father, meanwhile, took steps to ensure that the waitress felt appreciated and supported. He offered her opportunities that would improve her life, not as charity, but as recognition for her essential role in his daughter's happiness. He saw that her care and attention had shaped the child in ways that wealth alone could not. And the waitress, as always, remained humble, accepting help not out of pride but out of practicality, knowing that it would allow her to continue caring for the child and living a better life herself. The diner remained the same physically, but the atmosphere had shifted. What was once a quiet, ordinary place had become a sanctuary of human connection, a space where love, care, and understanding transcended wealth, status, and circumstance. The waitress continued her work, but now with a sense of fulfillment that went beyond daily tasks. Every cup of coffee, every plate of food, every moment of attention was infused with the knowledge that genuine kindness could change lives in ways that money and influence never could. By the end of Part 4, the story had reached its emotional climax. The waitress's months of quiet dedication were recognized. The child's loneliness was being replaced with genuine care, and the father, once distant and unaware, had become an active participant in nurturing his daughter's happiness. The stage was set for the final part of the story, where their lives would be forever transformed, not just by wealth or status, but by the enduring power of love, empathy, and human connection. Life after the revelation began to change for all three of them, though not in dramatic, immediate ways. The waitress continued her work at the diner, serving regular customers, cleaning tables, and pouring coffee with the same gentle care she always had. Yet a quiet sense of contentment now accompanied her every movement. She had always known that her actions mattered, but now she could see the real impact they had made on the little girl's life. Her days were still busy and sometimes exhausting, but they were filled with purpose and fulfillment that no struggle could take away. The child, meanwhile, began to flourish in ways that had seemed impossible before. She felt secure, not just because of her father's recognition, but because of the unwavering support she had received from the waitress. She was learning that love and care could exist without conditions, without expectations, and that someone could truly see her for who she was. The confidence she gained in the diner spilled over into other parts of her life. At school, she started participating more, raising her hand during lessons and even speaking to classmates with a small but growing assurance. Her father, too, began to adjust. The revelation of the waitress's role in his daughter's life had been eye-opening. He had always believed that providing material comforts and opportunities was enough, but he now realized how much he had missed by being absent emotionally. He began spending more time with his daughter, attending school events and listening to her stories with genuine interest. The bond between father and child grew stronger, but it was clear that the foundation of emotional care had been laid by the waitress, whose quiet dedication had bridged a gap that money could never reach. The father's appreciation for the waitress went beyond words. He wanted to ensure that she was recognized not as a favor, but as someone who had made a real difference in his child's life. He offered her opportunities, financial support, better living, arrangements, and chances to pursue her own goals that would allow her to live more comfortably and pursue her dreams. Yet the waitress accepted these gestures with humility. She did not see herself as special or heroic. She had simply acted out of care and compassion. Still, she realized that these opportunities would make it possible for her to continue helping the child and to improve her own life in meaningful ways. Even with all these changes, the diner remained their special place. It was no longer just a workplace for the waitress or a quiet corner for the child. It had become a symbol of connection, patience, and love. The walls held memories of countless small moments, sharing hot chocolate, listening to worries, drawing pictures on napkins, and laughing quietly in the evenings. The diner was a reminder that true care was often quiet, patient, and persistent, and that its effects could ripple far beyond what one could imagine. The child's world was now filled with more than just material comfort. She had learned to trust, to feel safe, and to express herself openly. She no longer clung to her backpack as if it were her only source of comfort. She laughed more freely, spoke more confidently, and began forming friendships that were genuine and lasting. She had learned from the waitress that kindness was not only about giving, but also about understanding, listening, and being present. These lessons would stay with her for the rest of her life. The waitress, too, experienced growth and transformation. She realized that her life, though still simple, had become richer in ways she had never anticipated. She had learned that the smallest acts of kindness could have the greatest impact, that emotional support was as vital as financial support, and that genuine care could change lives. She also understood the importance of patience and consistency, having seen firsthand how months of quiet effort had created a lasting bond. Her sense of fulfillment was not dependent on recognition or reward, though both had come in unexpected ways. It was rooted in the knowledge that she had truly made a difference in someone's life. The father often expressed gratitude in subtle but meaningful ways. He would stop by the diner when he could, bringing small gifts for the waitress or simply sharing a warm word of thanks. He respected her space and her humility, never trying to overshadow the quiet connection she had built with his daughter. Over time, a mutual respect and understanding developed between them, grounded in the shared love for the child and the recognition of the unique role each had played in her life. As weeks turned into months, the child's life continued to improve. She started exploring her interests more freely, drawing, reading, and even playing outside with a newfound sense of confidence. She had begun to understand that her worth was not tied to material things, but to the love and care she received from those who truly valued her. She looked at her father with admiration and at the waitress with deep gratitude, realizing that both had shaped her life in ways she would never forget. The diner remained a constant thread through all these changes. Even with the presence of wealth and recognition in the child's life, the waitress continued to treat the place with the same care and dedication. It was not just a workplace. It had become a haven of trust, patience, and quiet joy. The child often visited after school, and the three of them sometimes sat together in a small corner, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments that reminded them of how far they had come. One evening, as the waitress was cleaning up after a long day, the child tugged gently at her sleeve. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "For everything." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of months of trust, love, and emotional growth. The waitress knelt to look into the child's eyes, seeing sincerity and gratitude reflected there. She smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "I care about you, and that's enough." The child nodded, a small smile spreading across her face. It was a moment that captured the essence of their journey, a quiet acknowledgement of love, care, and the power of human connection. The waitress had given selflessly without expecting anything, and in return she had witnessed the transformation of a lonely, fragile child into a confident, happy one. It was a reward far greater than anything money could offer. As the days passed, the child's father took steps to ensure that her emotional needs continued to be met. He became more present in her life, attending events, spending quality time, and listening to her thoughts and feelings. Yet he never attempted to replace the bond she had with the waitress. Instead, he supported it, recognizing that the relationship had been vital to his daughter's growth and happiness. It was a lesson in humility, understanding, and the realization that love and care were sometimes more important than any amount of wealth or status. The waitress, in turn, continued her quiet work of nurturing, guiding, and caring. She helped the child navigate challenges, offered advice when needed, and provided a consistent source of emotional support. Her life had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. She now lived with a sense of security, a deeper understanding of the power of kindness, and a renewed belief in the importance of being present for others. Together, the three of them formed a bond that was unique and resilient. The child thrived in the combined care of both the waitress and her father, learning lessons that would shape her character, values, and future. The father learned the importance of emotional presence, humility, and gratitude, recognizing that even wealth could not replace genuine care, and the waitress discovered the profound impact of her selfless acts, understanding that true fulfillment came from making a difference in the life of another human being. As time went on, the diner remained their special place, a symbol of the quiet beginnings of a remarkable journey. The walls, once plain and ordinary, now seemed to hold the echoes of laughter, shared stories, and moments of trust and understanding. Each cup of coffee, each plate of food, and each small interaction became a testament to the power of human connection. It was a reminder that love, care and patience could create ripples that extended far beyond the immediate moment. The story concluded not with grand gestures or dramatic events, but with a simple, enduring truth, that small acts of kindness, when offered with genuine care, can change lives in ways that are profound and lasting. The Waitress had shown that even in a world filled with challenges, hardship, and inequality, the human heart had the power to heal, nurture, and transform. The child had learned that true security and happiness came not from wealth or status, but from love, understanding, and meaningful connections. And the father had discovered that the greatest treasures were not measured in money, but in the relationships and emotional bonds that defined a life well lived. In the quiet corners of the diner, in the shared smiles, gentle words, and moments of trust, the story of a poor waitress, a lonely child, and her wealthy father reached its heartwarming conclusion. It was a story of resilience, compassion, and the enduring power of kindness, a story that would remain etched in their hearts forever. And though life would continue with its challenges, joys, and uncertainties, they now faced it together, bound by love, respect, and the quiet understanding that true wealth was found not in possessions, but in the care and connection they shared. The little girl, once lonely and overlooked, was now seen, valued, and deeply loved. And the waitress, once struggling to survive, had discovered the extraordinary power of her own kindness, a power that had changed lives and would continue to do so for years to come.